Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, LawVu's community for in-house legal professionals. LawVu's mission is to accelerate the evolution of the in-house legal profession. And with this podcast, we showcase modern legal leaders from across the globe. We explore their unique journeys and how they're driving the transformation of our new profession. Join David Lancelot, LawVu's Chief Legal Officer and Executive Vice President of Advocacy, as he explores the cutting edge of in-house legal leadership. This is the Legal Leaders Podcast.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, David Lancelot, the CLO and EVP Advocacy at LawVu, and I am actually very excited to have with me today Russ Philpott, who is the Director of Legal Operations and Corporate Counsel at Okta. Russ, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So Russ and I think, Russ, we probably met in person the first time at Running Legal Like a Business, maybe?
Yes, sir. A couple of years ago, we had a colleague in common that we knew we both happen to know. Yeah.
True. Yeah. eBay colleague of mine who knew you. And you know, it was kind of ironic that we met in Las Vegas, and then eventually I found out that you lived, literally blocks away from me in California. So now we're able to meet in person, but today, of course, let's stick to virtual. Thank you very much for being on the show. Russ has a really interesting history in legal operations and in-house legal practice in Silicon Valley, in technology and global legal leadership. I think I'd like to start just for our international audience with your sort of soundbite on what Okta is and what it does and what the legal team is like there.
Yeah. So I joined Okta about 9 years, coming up on 9 years almost ago, right after they went IPO. So it's still kind of much smaller, relatively speaking anyways, company, very much that kind of builder mentality. And it still is in a lot of ways, but that transition it's a very interesting time to join. And the legal team, when I joined, was a 7 or 8, somewhere around there. And I think we're up to 90 or something like that now. So it's been a lot of growth in just the past several years I've been there. And for those of you who don't know what Okta is, we're an ID and access management company in the security space. Many folks probably use it without realizing that. I can't tell you how many times my early days, wearing the Okta backpack on Caltrain, and folks would say, that sounds familiar, I don't know why. And then the next day I'd see them again. Oh, I log into you every day. So we're kind of one of those companies that we have quite a number of customers, and it's one of those services that you probably use and you don't even realize it. And yeah, like I mentioned, the team's gone through a lot of growth. It was, like I said, 9 years now. When I joined, it was as a commercial attorney, which I'm an attorney by background, recovering attorney now, as they like to say in the legal ops profession. Around 2020, I think it was, we spun out legal operations as a separate function within the legal department in Okta. It was just myself, one other person, and then we had a contracts manager. It's a very small, scrappy team. Although I know for some that is a big team, that I know a lot of legal ops departments have won, which, kudos to you. I don't know how you do it. There's so many, things within legal operations that need attention, and one person's a lot. So we were very fortunate, and we've grown now to, I think our legal ops team is 12 to 14. I can't remember the exact number. So we're very fortunate to have a GC and now a CLO who took over a couple of years ago, who fully supports and understands the value of legal operation. We're able to do a lot more because of that. So, yeah, that's a little bit about the company and my time over the past 9 years at Okta.
Well, yeah. So that's a significant and sophisticated legal function to begin with, right? For a global technology business that does some pretty heavy data security, work. So they take data and structure and access and all that kind of stuff seriously, I'm sure. And I think, it's always helpful to have people around who understand the value of those things when you're trying to push this kind of agenda. We all know that the agenda is valuable, but to not have to educate as much on why data and structure and operations itself is important, is great, is a great place to be. So I'd love if you could tell us about your journey from, I myself also commercial lawyer, lots of commercial lawyers that I know. And I think for some reason it's a pretty, it's a good on-ramp into operational thinking, I guess, operational mindset, commercial, almost sales, right? Like comes with a lot of operations. So I'd love to hear more, Russ, about how you went from coming in as a commercial attorney, I'm sure like hammering contracts all day long, and turning that into this career path that you're on now, and the impact it's had for Okta.
Yeah, so it is kind of interesting. I joined again as a commercial attorney and was doing deals, and it was a much smaller legal team. I think our commercial team was, I think there were 3 of us when I first joined. And I actually, for a little context, I didn't know about legal operations. I didn't know it was a thing at all. But from day one, because we were a small team, and as I mentioned, we just gone IPO, the process for anyone who's gone through that of going or planning an IPO, you have to kind of clean up a lot of your processes, and legal is no different. And so I was kind of part of that transition and saw, kind of to a great extent, once we were public, the kind of a hyper focus in that area. We didn't have any legal ops folks. Like I mentioned, we, didn't spin up the department for a few years later, but I realized pretty early on that what I was doing was essentially legal ops work. I just kind of, for me, it was just part of my day to day as a commercial attorney, where obviously, supporting sales, a lot of the work I was doing that I would consider legal operations was supporting that go-to-market group. So, we set up our first CLM when I was there, building out our knowledge base. We started building out a program for training sales on kind of how to work with legal and some kind of high level concepts and discussions they can have to get ahead of some issues for the commercial legal team. The idea being that, if we can kind of set up the sales org for success and reducing, potential red lines or things that will come up during negotiation, and kind of keep attorneys out of it, it'd be a lot easier. So we kind of focused on that area. And so I started building out a pretty robust knowledge management program, again, without really knowing what I was doing. And it was mostly for sales. So it was, giving them canned responses to common questions, building out kind of an FAQ doc, like get more information that was available, that was ready for them. And that slowly transformed to, okay, well now that we have this kind of legal wiki, so to speak, maybe we should have them for our own internal team on our processes, our policies, shared team calendar, just kind of the basic stuff, you would think. And it kind of snowballed from there. Again, this is just something I was doing as, part of my day to day as a commercial attorney. And one of the kind of bigger projects was on the, from an operations perspective, is that we had a pretty messy process when it came to outside counsel. We didn't have any kind of centralized location of who are the firms that we're working with, what's the invoice review process, we, no billing guidelines, none of that stuff. And I started looking into that and realized, no, there's a whole, this is something that really should require quite a bit of attention and focus. And that was kind of the first major project and initiative I did. But a lot of this, whether it's CLNs or contracts, outside counsel, all that stuff, it really comes back to knowledge management. And so I realized, okay, once we kind of started looking at a billing system, all the user guides, policies, like I said, the billing guidelines, we have to have a way to centralize that information to enable any sort of process or system that you're going to have to support that. It has to support some sort of, knowledge base that you have. So that was kind of how the evolution of kind of my transition. And I realized, me personally, I just became much more fascinated by that world of legal operations than, I was in my day-to-day job as a commercial attorney. And like I mentioned, once we realized that was a thing, started going to events and conferences and meeting other folks in the industry, I realized there's a career here. This is something that was very interesting to me. So that's kind of what kickstarted it. And then once we were able to convince our GC at the time to spin up a legal ops department, knowledge management kind of, fell under my domain. And I was able to do a lot more with that and hire a couple of folks to focus on that kind of training side and our knowledge management piece as well. And really kind of spend a lot of attention to that area, which is great. And it's, our ability to kind of help our team scale was because we were able to focus particularly in knowledge management in these other areas as well.
Absolutely. But so I think it's a fascinating arc. And you have an MBA JD, right? Santa Clara, go Broncos.
Yeah, there you go.
And we're both Santa Clara alumni. I'm not as much as you. I don't know what you would define that as, double graduate degree, Santa Clara. That must have had something to do with your drive to put in place process and be more operational, like operational mindset as a lawyer. Is that where that came from, or somewhere else? Because a lot of attorneys don't come in and go, okay, we really need to put some, scalable processes in place here as a top priority.
No, I agree. I think a lot of attorneys, that's certainly not, necessarily their focus. And that's, to be fair, that's not, necessarily what they're paid to do. They're paid to be the expert in their area, but it's very much a reality of, especially when you talk about attorneys and, the information they have in their minds, right? Like that tribal knowledge or whatever you want to call it, putting that into some sort of, centralized format for shared information across your team. It's going to put your team in a better position to succeed as a team of individuals, but also as a collective, meaning, very basic things like having a kind of a standardized response to, whether it be for customers or internally as well, for the teams you're supporting as a business partner, be able to kind of have a standardized response, like a kind of unified front, so to speak. That's huge. And I think the only way you can do that is by giving them a platform and a way to standardize that. And that is, at the end of the day, again, knowledge management. And I think going back to your question about, the MBA and exposure to that, I don't know. I think for some people it's personality. Like I that's kind of how I think about things generally. But I do think that it certainly put me in a good position to be aware, like a little bit more hyper aware of areas where processes would make more sense, making sure that we have guidelines. Like that's always in the back of my mind. It's kind of the analogy, I think, in the legal community, the analogy that I would say is, attorneys aren't paid to know every single law and statute, but what they're paid to do is to have the background, the experience to kind of be able to identify red flags, saying, wait a minute, I should look into that, or we need to bring in an expert for this area. They don't necessarily know that, but they know enough to identify those things, right? And I'd say, maybe the business background certainly helped me to be hyper aware and be able to identify, hey, this is something that we should kind of not just, band-aid solution. It's like we should actually build something here or do something a bit more long-term, for scalability purposes, a long-term solution, not just like a short-term fix. Because just as well as anybody, because you've been, in this spaces for a long time as well, quite often, you will hear people have solutions or to implement kind of a change that is really meant to address that situation or that time and place for that team. But very quickly that, whether it's a process, tool, system, whatever it is, can be outdated. So like being able to kind of think things through a little bit more, whether it's the degree or just the experience or my personality or combination of all three, I don't know. But I do think that helped me in a lot of ways.
Sure. Yeah. No, I sometimes think, Russ, that the MBA can inoculate the law student against the drive to go to the nth degree of detail and perfection.
Yeah.
And as you say, give you some of that. And it's funny because like MBAs are pretty heavy work, right? But they actually give you a very basic understanding of business. When you're actually in a business for a few years, you realize how basic MBA understanding is. Not that I have one. It's still a lot better than you get in law school, right? Like a trillion times better. So I tell any student that asks me, do the dual JD MBA, right? It will pay dividends for the rest of your life. And I think you're a great example of that, because you're right in the, as our field is disrupted more and more and more, people like you, people who have the ability to be business people with legal skills, are the ones who are going to come out on top. So yeah, just anybody listening, JD MBA, do it.
And I will say, even the side, like I 100% agree, having that background exposure is very valuable, because whether, you want to stay, at a law firm or some practitioner, I mean, there's so many, from an operations perspective, budget, finances, all of that is, you get a lot of skills. I still to this day say, I don't care what your major is, what you study, take at least 1 or 2 accounting classes, finance. Like just, again, the very basic concepts that you learn there are incredibly, I mean, I on the budget side anyways, that's another conversation, but like having that awareness and being able to speak that language, especially, whether it's your own business or the law department in a company, being able to work, it allows you to kind of work cross-functionally a bit better. And even just taking some classes, I think will help. But I second that very much so.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't think that law schools do a good enough job of telling their students you can, in almost all cases, take classes outside of law school while you're in law school in the wider university environment, and get credit for them, right? And as you're saying, those will be invaluable in future, whether you're at a law firm, you have your own practice, or you're in-house. You're going to need to understand how to speak the language of the business, and that's accounting, finance, strategy, planning, etc. So yeah, I think I'd love to talk to you now, Russ, about where you see this all going. When we first started talking about knowledge management, I think my statement to you was, I feel like knowledge management has gone from, over the last, maybe year or two, gone from something that was almost an afterthought for most in-house functions, right? The ones that sort of traditional in-house legal functions, obviously not Okta, but something that you get to when you get to it. And in my experience at some of the companies I've worked at, you give everybody maybe 10% of their role is to do operational excellence initiatives, meaning they do no percent of their role, operational excellence initiatives, nothing gets done. And 5 years later, the project has hardly started. You don't have any templates, you don't have a, knowledge base, nothing. And it's gone from that situation to pretty much the most important job. That's how I see it. And we can put some meat on that bone. Why has it become the most important job? But what are your thoughts on that arc?
I agree with that 100%. Anyone who's ever been to any legal operations conference, you'd be hard pressed to find topics or conversations that are focused on knowledge management. And I think part of it's for two reasons. One is, it's to your point, it seems like it's just a given or accepted that, it's the thing that people do, and they don't really focus time on it. It's just an assumption that is part of what we do, right? That everyone's kind of focused on that. But it's also very foundational to everything. I mean, I kind of mentioned that, whether you're talking the tool system or whatever, I always say, tools always get, a lot of focus, as they should, at any event. But a tool would fix, bad process, lack of process, and the same knowledge management and the foundational information that you find there. If you don't have that, a tool it's not magic, right? It's not going to just change things for you. So it really is foundational to everything. And I think the fact that it doesn't get enough attention, does a disservice, I think, to all the other areas where, in legal operations, you're going to spend your time and effort. I do think there's a bigger microscope kind of on being applied to knowledge management right now for a lot of reasons. But one of them is obviously the elephant in the room, the AI, right? I mean, of it all, that really does change the perspective, because I think, and we're no different. There's always room for improvement, even at Okta. I mean, our system's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Where there are gaps, where there are issues, it's identified by humans, and they can ping us and send us a note or Slack or whatever, and we can kind of get the answers, update our knowledge base, and that's that. Because the human can kind of identify, wait, that doesn't make sense. That's not for me. I don't think this is right. Whatever the situation is, AI can't necessarily do that. And I think it's two things. One is, I think it'll be a much more attention being paid to knowledge management generally, of hey, now that we have this great technology in AI, we can allow folks to either perform their work, respond to questions, whatever it is, using AI, but we need a knowledge base to do that. So I think that's one, is there's going to be focus for that. But the second thing, and this is more of the issue that we're going to be facing at Okta. I don't call it an issue. Let's call it an opportunity, because it is an opportunity at the end of the day. We're going to have to rethink how knowledge management programs are structured. And what I mean by that, let me give an example, is that up until very recently, any sort of knowledge or information you are trying to make available, it's making available to humans. Humans know their role, their team, their purpose for the question, whatever it is they're trying to access, whatever information they're trying to get, policy they're trying to use or read, they know what they're trying to apply it to. AI doesn't, right? And so prompting is very important, but I think context is going to be that much more important. And it's trying to train humans and then AI as well on the context. So the best example I can give of what I'm talking about is we're playing around with an AI Slack bot. If someone in the company wants to find an NDA, at Okta, we have one for sales. We might have one for, for vendor agreements. There's different types of NDAs for different situations. So if someone comes to our AI Slack bot and says, I need an NDA, we have a lot of information in our internal knowledge base or internal wiki to direct for, the individual to the right document they're looking for. Problem is the problem with it because of AI is we have kind of built our internal knowledge management program based on kind of groups that functions that we're supporting. So, hey, if you're on the sales team, here's your kind of section to go to, and here's your legal support content for you. If you're in marketing, it's here. If you're in whatever it is, partner, it's over here. Within those areas, you can then find the information you need, an NDA, for example. But if you go to Slack, the AI bot, and you say, I need an NDA, it doesn't know who you are or why you're asking what you're asking. And so it's going to pull one of the, 3, 4 that we might have. And as you know, and again, David, better than anyone else, like in legal profession, if you give wrong information or incomplete information or missing, whatever it is, that's a very big risk you're creating for your team and your company. So now we're kind of having to rethink, okay, well, the way that we had this set up initially makes sense. And it still does for people to say, oh, I'm in this group, or this is what I'm looking for. So I go into this section. But now it's almost the opposite, where we have to say, okay, what is it you're trying to find? Okay. And then based on that, setting up the knowledge or having it shown, provided, displayed, whatever your approach is, in a way that AI can use correctly, right? And the current model for a lot of people is not looking through that lens. You're looking at it through the lens of the human person who, they know who they are. So I think there's going to be kind of a focus on knowledge, because that again is what AI needs. So there's going to be focus for that reason, but also being able to do it in a way that AI can actually use, which is, different from humans. So I know I said a lot there, but that's kind of where I think the vision is I think it's a focus because we have this new technology that can do a lot, but it needs information to do that. And then making that information available in the right way. So you're not giving inaccurate information, incomplete information, et cetera, which kind of does, at least at Okta, I'm assuming we're not unique, meaning you have to think about how you're structuring your data, your knowledge.
Absolutely. Yeah. So maybe to recap and just put, I think, some of that in my own words. Technology is advancing rapidly to the point where agentic systems will become widely available. A lot of it due to Anthropic, Claude, Model Context Protocol, tool sets being rolled out to, the major hosting platforms. Azure, you can get tool sets now to build out these agentic systems. I wouldn't say easily, because I, of course, have no idea how to do it, but relatively easily, right? And those systems will be deployed in companies, and they already are widely deployed in enterprises, but those systems are going to be deployed widely in in-house teams as well, relatively soon, right? I'm thinking 6 to 12 months, 2 to 3 years from now, it's going to be pretty much table stakes that you're going to be able to answer questions based on knowledge to your employees directly, right? In an automated fashion, in a much more automated fashion than you have now, where you have to build out, sort of hard-coded workflows, maybe a bit of LLM and generative in there, which is great, but it's not the same as the agentic principles where they can take actions and, start up matters and fill in forms and send letters and do all kinds of stuff internally. And eventually, I'd say probably 3 to 5 years from now, when legal gets comfortable with it, they'll be doing that with other enterprises agentic systems. So, and all of that is going to be based on the knowledge that is curated, structured, cleansed, ensured is accurate and up to date by whoever is managing the in-house legal functions, knowledge management systems, databases, right? So, and that's super powerful and allows us to take a ton of work off the plate. And I mean, I know some cutting edge teams now have implemented these things with sort of, consultants coming in and spending loads of money and building out custom workflows and that sort of thing. That they're way early adopters, and it's really there wasn't a buy option, it was all build, and they wanted to be on the cutting edge, and they've done that. Great. And they're answering thousands to tens of thousands of queries from their businesses on a monthly basis for the legal function, all based on that knowledge management stuff. Those kind of opportunities will just get broader and broader for in-house legal, making what is in your knowledge portfolio just vastly more important. And as you said, I think one of the key I think there's two really key considerations here, or maybe even three. One is, what do you do when those things are in place? Like, what is the job of the legal team when you can do that? And the other one is the risk that accrues to not having your eye on the ball in terms of knowledge management. And I think we've seen some really great examples of that at Amazon and Meta recently in the news. If you've got, and you're just talking about your wiki, right? Your wiki is sort of like, in a lot of companies, it's this thing that somebody might deal with sometimes. But when the wiki is being read thousands of times a day by an agentic system, and instructions are going out to developers, and developers are implementing them, and AWS goes down for 6 hours, it becomes a tremendously more impactful situation, right? So all of a sudden, knowledge becomes really, really important. So what are your thoughts about how we move from a reactive team that answers questions sort of on the fly? Maybe they look at the wiki, maybe they point people to a workflow, moving from that stance to our job is actually to build out evergreen knowledge, keep it up to date for a machine, and then do another job after that, right? You talked earlier to me offline about moving from being a bank teller to a chief legal services officer. I thought that was a great analogy, but what are your thoughts about how we run the legal function through the transformation?
Yeah, and I think you touched on it a little bit too. I think that, and we haven't really talked about this yet, but there's building, from the knowledge management perspective, there's building that program out, right? But then, to your point, you have a handful of folks using it. If it's not, there's some issues or it's not up to date, humans will address it. And I've noticed this or whatever. AI can't do that. And so I think in addition to building out a program, the next piece of it is, how do you now either automate to the extent you can, or at least have some sort of process system in place to maintain that? Because that's the other piece of knowledge. We haven't really talked about that yet, but it's the maintenance side of it, right?
Yep.
Which means, again, we have our own thing, but now we have to kind of track, okay, what are all the pages within our, if it's a wiki, you're talking about that, or, documents or playbooks or whatever you're using for, if you're using Notebook LM to have playbooks and different reference materials for your legal team. We didn't talk about that much either, of your legal team actually using these types of tools to train, to make sure that that team is trained up as well. So now, how do you kind of do that in a way where instead of, having a handful of folks using it, you're using it, to your point, in an agentic world, is how do you support this going forward? Because AI is not going to flag if something's wrong. And now more and more people are going to be using it than ever were, before, whether they know it, right? Like I mentioned, we're using this Slack bot. They don't know that the information is being pulled from the wiki. They just know they're asking the question or get the answer they need. So you're going to see a lot more and more than, of course, we're in a world now where every company is really kind of pushing this, internally with their customers, et cetera. So the volume is going to increase, the usage is going to increase, which just puts, again, a highlight on maintenance as well. So making sure that you have not just your own, knowledge base, but a way to track and identify all those areas that you have. Who are the subject matter experts, for each piece? Who's responsible for now content that wasn't really a thing before? But who do we go to? We have a system in place where we have a list of kind of all this content. We have someone on my team who did a great job and was able to kind of apply some code so that there's an auto ping that goes out to those subject matter experts at a set cadence to say, hey, here's all your content. Is this still accurate? What do we need to change? So we kind of have a system in place to try and maintain that with that recognition that going forward, it's really going to be much more important because again, bringing to attention, hey, there's something wrong with this content. That's not going to happen necessarily the way it used to. And so you got to have a process in place to really get ahead of that.
Yeah, no, and I think it leads to some really interesting leadership challenges because there's not a lot of high fives for scalable systems that get out of the way of the business, if you know what I mean. There's a lot of high fives for crisis, legal save the day, M&A, we got the deal done. There's not a lot of high fives for thousands of queries were answered accurately and the business did not run off a cliff because a bot looked at an old Wikipedia article, right?
Yep.
But the risk there is really tremendous because you're implementing systems at scale where before you were doing unscalable things. And if somebody asked a question of a lawyer and the lawyer gave a sort of, I don't have the most up-to-date policy because I didn't go to the SharePoint site and find it before I sent it to you. I just keep it on my local drive like everybody does, right?
Those are the scariest words legal can hear, by the way.
But now you're moving to a place where that answer could be given immediate. Well, and one of the great things about this generative stuff is how authoritative it sounds, right? It's so authoritative. You could give it anything and it will convince you it's right. So yeah, I think it leads to a place where leadership, yourself, your CLO, your CEO, how do you set a vision for and inspire a team to operate in a very different way? And what is the thing that we do once we get, it's a perennial issue for operations. And anybody that thinks about like a scaled approach, a services approach to legal, as opposed to the sort of traditional white glove, I'm tailoring your suit approach. But like, what do we do once we've got the scaled systems in place, right? What is the work that the legal function can do at that point? So have you had thoughts about that?
I think it's interesting because I think they talk, especially in the conversation of AI, right? The fear of everyone is taking jobs, but I don't think that's the case. I think it'll certainly take away tasks as it should, but especially when you're talking about attorneys, like that's a good thing. The whole point, but one of the main kind of North Stars, so to speak, of legal operations is freeing up attorneys to do their high value work, right? So AI really should be supporting that. Now, how your team is structured, in that new world of AI, I do think there is potential for change there, right? Because of the nature of what it can do and maybe the way that you talk about legal services, how that can be provided in a different manner. But I think all of that there is room for change. And same thing with, tools and systems, et cetera. I mean, you add this new layer to it, the data that's being produced, they talk about how much, Edon's a great example where you have so much data in there. I mean, like the level of detail on invoices, no one can possibly know all that. But with AI, you can leverage that to really look at the data you already have in your tools and systems in place, and be able to provide much deeper insights into what attorneys can do or legal ops folks as well. So I think the potential there is huge. It's just making sure that kind of what you touched on earlier, leadership sees value in that. Cause it's like you said, you're not getting the kudos or the pats on the back for, legal ops typically doesn't, right? Cause what we do, it's a lot of times it's kind of like measured approaches, small changes here and there. It's not like a massive overhaul, thing. It can be, I suppose, but a lot of times it's kind of a progression of improvement and change. And, it's hard. And I struggle with this too, of like putting data and KPIs around, if you change your knowledge base, how many fewer, emails did an attorney get, or how many fewer requests? it's hard to measure that. But there are some teams that do see it very quickly, see that change in improvement. So I think getting that buy-in and that, that insight at the top is huge. And then I think accepting that it can change the way people do their jobs for the better is also something like that mentality is still, I don't know if there's a resistance to it, but it's still relatively new. And a lot of the legal teams, especially, are still kind of at the stage where they're playing around with doing a lot of testing of tools and systems and what to do, what can work, what doesn't work. So I think that's more of like a 2 to 3 year kind of, I don't say problem, 2 to 3 years away from kind of thinking about how your organization can truly change because of that too.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so what I'm seeing industry wise is, first of all, the vast majority of companies do not have an in-house lawyer currently, right? It's almost seen as a luxury. It's one of the last hires you make in traditional companies, right? But I literally just read this morning a newsletter from Ann Corwin Payne at Payne Associates, who was on the show maybe a month or two ago, top Silicon Valley executive recruiter. And the market is expanding dramatically, right? We're having an explosion of companies here, startups, scale-ups, and they're all looking for counsel. And they're bringing counsel in earlier, more junior, less experienced, but those people often have skills that old guys like me don't have. AI governance, the implementation of systems that are scalable, et cetera, right? So I think, as you say, and I think I love what you said, Russ, we'll see less tasks. A lot of those tasks are administrative, very, very tactical, that can be done by a machine and should be done by a machine. And the profession will expand and evolve. There will be more roles for lawyers, particularly those ones who embrace this change. And I actually think that, as you've said to me before, there was a time when people thought, what's going to happen to retail banking? There's actually a lot more retail banking. I'm always shocked. I see these retail banking establishments I never go in, but clearly people do. And the ATM does the job of the person that back in my day used to stand inside a booth and hold a weird plastic tube and send you the cash in the tube. Unbelievable, right? But those people have much more interesting jobs now, right? They're not sending you cash in a tube. They're advising you on, your portfolio, your mortgage options, your auto loan, et cetera, right? And I think we're going to have a analogous transformation at least in the in-house profession, where we'll be able to take a lot of this drudgery away, which has always been the dream of operations and scalable systems, and see the impact of the profession expand out from just reactive, substantive advising.
Yeah.
In my humble opinion.
Well, I agree. And that's what we were talking, we were talking offline before that about how, half jokingly, but the concept is true of that approach of, and I heard this at an event the other day, actually, and I can't remember the person's name who was talking about it. So it's not my own idea around my own analogy, but that ATM concept of, people worried that would kill, branches, but it actually exploded it it expanded it. And the idea of being that it didn't change banking, it just changed the idea of banking services. And I think the same thing in the legal profession, if it's not changing, attorneys or, the legal needs, it's just the way that it's being provided. And I was, half joking that maybe we'll see some new titles of chief legal services officer or something. Cause it is, if with the advent and kind of, expansion of AI and use, particularly in legal, and it's still very, very early stages for everybody, and especially legal, how we're providing support to the other functions. People call them clients. I'm like, why? It always drives me crazy. In-house companies, you call them your clients. So no, they're your colleagues, right? They're our business partners. How are we advising our business partners? How are we providing that information to them? That model is and should change because, I did this. I'm sure you did too when you're commercial counsel as well. How many times I had to respond to, questions that it was the same question over and over, whatever. And like having a tool or system who can handle some of that, it's like, oh, we have a knowledge base that stores this information. We can leverage AI to kind of filter and respond to some of these things. It does two things. One is, on the attorney side, the legal team side, it saves a lot of bandwidth, right? Time that's not spent responding to things. But also on the, from the business partner perspective, it improves their experience as well, because now, especially if you're talking about a global team, which we have at Okta, now you have folks who are, based anywhere in the world, need a response to a question. They don't have to wait for the right time zone or the right person to get on and respond or you don't have to structure a team anymore to try and, manage that. Now, if you have the right systems in place and the night, at the end of the day, knowledge management program is strong enough, you can now provide, your legal counsel to your business partner in a way that's vastly different from the way, any time before now, in real time. So that is hugely valuable. And that's why, I talk about chief legal services officer, but that's the idea, is that you're changing, within your legal team, how your team can function and manage. And then for your business partners and the team that you're supporting, changing that experience for them as well. I mean, at Okta, I like to think that we have, the legal team has great relationships with everyone, so it's not an issue. But I certainly know other companies where legals, the team no one wants to go to, or for whatever reason. I think, the changing that service model delivery, or the service delivery model is going to be very valuable for any team in any company. But having that mindset and recognition to do that, and it can be a painful process if you don't, have your team set up the right way, or you don't have that knowledge management program to support that. There's a lot of work that has to be done, and a lot of it, to your point, thankless. I think AI changes that a little bit, because you can very quickly show, hey, by cleaning up our knowledge base, we're able to have a Slack bot, or we're able to do this. People see value in that very quickly, which is a plus for legal operations in general. But having that service kind of model change, mindset changes, is going to be, it's going to be game changing for a lot of legal departments.
Yes. Well, you heard it here first, Chief Legal Services Officer. I think it nicely encapsulates a move to legal as an accelerant to the business, as a function that doesn't get in the way of the business, that understands that our business partners would prefer to get their initiatives done without having to talk to us, right? We're not the most important people in the room. And then we can inject ourselves much earlier into strategy, operations, leadership, and basically have much more interesting and more impactful roles.
And one thing I'll add to that, because that's a good reminder, one thing that I hear quite often at events, or, even talking to colleagues and stuff, attorneys are I shouldn't say that's a broad brush, but there are many attorneys who are, value their relationship with the individuals that they're supporting. So they're, the first fear of like, well, I don't want AI to respond. I like having that kind of the white glove service and this and that. And I think while I do recognize and appreciate that, and I actually agree that there's a lot of value in having that kind of direct client, the white glove service, so to speak. But I think the opportunity here is it changes what is that white glove service. Is there really value in answering the same question over and over again just to have that brief interaction? Or if you can have a system, a tool, again, a very robust knowledge management program that allows, with the advent of AI to handle kind of those questions, it frees you up to kind of have maybe a weekly or monthly check-in with like the sales leadership, and you can kind of do rapport building that way, and more strategy. You mentioned, David, the strategy of it. You can have a strategic conversation about, hey, what are the things that we can be doing differently on legal? How can we better empower your team to, do X, Y, Z? It frees you up to have those conversations. I mean, if you think about how much time attorneys spend answering questions on emails or Slack, if you can save those hours in the month or in the week or whatever that looks like, and apply it towards like strategic conversations with those same people you're supporting, there's gonna be a lot more value there. And then going forward, it'll allow you to kind of iterate and change, whether it's your templates or your information you're providing, the support you're providing. So I do think people have that fear, and I did want to call it out because I do think that's a real one, but I think the way of looking at it needs to change, which is like, hey, how can I use that time differently now? Maybe be more of a strategic conversation versus just responding to requests, right? I think the business partners will see more value in that as well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, an anecdote from my own career. early days at eBay, I spent entirely too much time renumbering NDAs. Number 2, number 3, SOWs, sorry, not NDAs, SOWs, off the back of MSAs. And unbelievable that I did that now, but it was just something that needed to be done. We didn't have a system in place. Contract management wasn't rolled out. Then it was. And it wasn't because I wasn't renumbering SOWs that I got invited to the offsite in Buenos Aires, but it certainly helped that I didn't have to spend the time hammering away at really quite pointless, low-risk documents. And I was able to repurpose that time. I think the key for me is knowing what to do with the new bandwidth, having the vision, and driving towards that vision of scalable and strategic legal services as opposed to reactive, white glove service. That's how we get ahead of this thing and sort of leverage what generative and agentic AI can do for the in-house profession. I really appreciate this time, Russ. Thank you for spending this time with our audience. It's been a really fascinating conversation. And I'm looking forward to the next one. Frankly, I think we've got a long way to go. And I'll see you soon, of course. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure. Appreciate it.
And thank you everybody for joining us on the Legal Leaders Podcast. We'll see you on the next episode. Cheers.